if the goal is to be what you actually are, right, in terms of consciousness itself, if that's the goal, and we talk about, okay, what's the nature of consciousness, right? Is consciousness trying to change anything? No. I mean, if you actually look at consciousness, awareness just is. That's the only thing you can say about it. It just is. You can't argue with it. You can't question it. It's the only thing that is an absolute truth because there's no denying it, right? Everything else is up for grabs, right? Everything else we can, theorize about, conceptualize, and so forth, and that's what everybody does, even the spiritual teachers. Right? But if you just look at the nature of consciousness, and especially if you look at it directly for yourself, not understand it conceptually, but if you look at it and you can see that it just is, that's the only thing you can say about it, it just is. It's not trying to change anything, it's not coming from anywhere, it's not going anywhere, you don't see any beginning to it, you don't see an end to it, it doesn't have any qualities, it's not happy, it's not sad, it's not a man, it's not a woman. So it's interesting because maybe, what if the truth is that everything is perfect? We talk about the fact that human suffering is a function of people thinking that things should be different, right? That's what causes suffering. People think that they should be different, think that other people should be different, right? Think that the world should be different. What if the truth is that everything is perfect? And what if the only reason it seems imperfect is because of the way we think about it, the way it's conceptualized? And the thing about it is that if it is the case that everything is perfect, right away the mind comes in and say, "Now wait a minute, don't tell me everything is perfect. Look at the last election." Look at Hitler, look at what's going on, look at my parents, right? Look at my kids, look at me, right? But what if the only reason that that's the case is because of the way we think? What if the only reason that that's the case is our conditioning? And what if things are perfect the way they are, but we just don't understand how it works? What if that's the case? What if the kingdom of heaven on earth, because it's said that the kingdom of heaven on earth is not something other than the way things are, that the kingdom of heaven on earth is the way it actually is now. Well, if that's the case, then obviously, if it's the kingdom of heaven on earth, then it must be a matter of seeing it differently, right? Not that it should be different, but seeing it differently. I've been studying this Ramesh Balsekar, who was a student of Nisargadatta, and he came up with a teaching that was different from Nisargadatta and different from Ramana Maharshi, because in the case of those teachers, they were non-dual teachers, but their focus was strictly on self-realization, on experiencing the truth, experiencing your true nature, right? But Ramesh took it to the next step. Okay, once I experience my true nature, now what? How do I live as that true nature? Obviously, I can't walk around in the world as awareness. That's not possible. And if I experience my true nature as awareness, I still have the same body, I still have the same family, I still have the same mind, I still live in the same world. So then what would be different after that? Well, the thing that's interesting about it is, if you do experience your true nature, and if you are identical to that, if you're being that, right, then would you be interested in anything being different than it is? Interesting. So then maybe if it's not a matter of anything being different than it is, then maybe it's a matter of starting from the way it is and looking at how that could be seen differently. That could allow for the experience of peace, right? Could allow for the experience that people are after, right? This idea of the peace that passeth understanding. So what would allow for that peace? So it gets interesting because Ramesh, apparently, from my understanding of his teachings, started from the way it is perfect. Now let's go back. Let's go back from there and see how that could be so, right? Well, one of the things he came up with is he said, well, one way that could be so is that if it is true that thy will be done, if it is true that everything that's happening is happening as the will of God, or if you want to talk about it in another way, as following cosmic law, right? Or following the way of the source. Any way you want to talk about it, right? That everything that's happening is coming from there, and that individuals don't have free will. So now it starts to look like, okay, so God or consciousness or awareness or the cosmic law or whatever is manifesting itself in the form of billions of human beings who experience themselves as being separate from one another and separate from the world, is manifests itself that way, and it's acting through all these people doing what these people are doing, and you have nothing to say about it. That's the application of thy will be done. You have nothing to say about it. Now, and then if you take it further, right, that through the understanding of the teachings of the masters about consciousness and awareness, even through the current understandings by quantum physicists, right, that what appears to be the world is an appearance. Yes? It's an appearance. Well, if it's an appearance, is it real? Is it real in the way we deal with it? As if, we deal with it as if it's real. But is it really real? If it's an appearance, the definition of an appearance is that it's an appearance. It's insubstantial. It's not actual. It appears this way. And isn't it the case that what you see when you look through your eyes is an appearance? It has to be, because you don't see what I see, right?
Then either everything is real or nothing is real.
Well, or everything appears to be real, right? Everything appears to be real, and nothing is real. The only thing that it cannot be argued in terms of what's real is your own awareness, right? You can't argue about that. You can't argue. But everything else is up for grabs, right? Because it's an appearance, and everything else is up for grabs because it's an interpretation. Everybody's interpreting everything differently. Your world is not the same as my world, right? So it's an appearance. Even in terms of quantum physicists, they're saying that when you break it down to subatomic particles, there is nothing there. Which means that when those particles form into a form, right, it's an appearance. So that's one thing, right? So you have the first thing, which is that you have no free will, and there's science. It was interesting because Ramesh actually quoted in the book that I'm reading the scientist that I shared with you that did the research on the idea that the brain readiness activity happens before you become aware of anything. He actually quoted that. And not only is that the case, but we also know, and you can see this if you really pay attention to it, that even your thoughts occur before you become aware of them. Your thoughts are an interpretation of something that's happened, right? So there's already time there. Something happens, and then your thoughts are an interpretation of that, right? And then you become aware of your thoughts. So everything that you see, everything that you hear has already happened.
That's just a thought about thoughts.
But that still has, there is a time differentiation between what's coming in through the senses, the process that happens in the brain, and you becoming aware of it.
So that we really can never, as a body, live in the present moment because everything we're experiencing has already happened.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. So that's more evidence of no free will. How could you have free will when you're behind the activity at all times, right? So when you start to examine the evidence says, thy will be done, must be true because you don't have any free will. And if you don't have any free will, where's the activity coming from? Right? So if you take that, right, no free will, and then you take appearance, that everything is an appearance, right? And then you take the simple understanding that consciousness is not physical, right? That right away kills the idea of death, right? So now you have nothing to do with what's happening. It's an appearance and there's no death, right? Now, could you allow things to be now? Because everything that you could come up with that you think should be different is not a problem now, right? Because it's just an appearance, nobody actually dies, and it's God's will, it's all God's will. That's what this guy teaches, by the way. That's what this guy teaches. And he says the peace that passeth understanding is the peace that comes from understanding that. It's totally inconsistent with the usual way that people understand everything, right? This what if it's true? What if it's true? He tells a joke. It was funny. He tells a joke because part of this is that if it is true, right, then you can relax and just go with what's happening, right? You could just relax and go with what's happening. Nothing's ever wrong. He tells a joke about this. He said that he was the president of the Bank of India, by the way. So this guy's an interesting spiritual teacher because he didn't live in a cave. You know, he had a family and kids and he was a very successful businessman and all that. And after he retired, he became a seeker and had, I think he's actually, Ramana Maharshi was his first guru, and then he switched over to Nisargadatta and spent the rest of his life examining reality and coming up with his understanding of what reality is like from the view of awareness, right? So he tells a funny story. He said that when he was working in the bank business, a woman came in, I think he had an office at home. A guy came in and was complaining to him and complaining about his wife. You know, she's like this, she's like that. She won't listen to anything I say. So I have to do this and I have to do that. And then at one point he says to Ramesh, so am I right? And Ramesh says, you're right. So the guy leaves. About a half hour later, his wife comes in. And she sits down and she starts complaining. She says, my husband does this, he does that, he's driving me crazy, he makes me do these things, and now I have to do this to deal with him in order to get along. Am I right? And he says, you're right. So Ramesh's wife was in the kitchen. She comes in after the woman leaves, she comes in and she says, what's going on here? The guy comes in, he's right. The wife comes in, she's right too. What are you doing? And he says to her, you're right. But see how easy it is when you just go along with everything? So this is an interesting thing to consider, you know, especially in terms of what we practice here, because, you know, what seems to be the case if you just look at the evidence, what seems to be the case if you don't think the evidence isn't the truth, but you have to come up with some, analysis to come up with what's true, some philosophical argument about what's true, instead of just saying the way it is true. Let's understand that. And it makes sense when you look at the whole business of being a spiritual seeker, right? Because as I have said here, when this process starts, if thy will be done is true, you had no choice about being here, right? Some people have said to Ramesh when he was teaching, don't you agree that this is a new age? This is that there's more people that are waking up and become enlightened than any time before, and it's proof that there's things that are going to change in the future and more humanity's going to wake up? And he said, no. There's more people, that's all. There's more people, so there's more enlightened people. But it's always been the case through history that there's been a very few people who were actually enlightened and could actually see things as they were. A very few people in relationship to the majority of people who couldn't, right? So that it may be the case that hasn't changed. That has stayed the same. And maybe it will always stay the same. People have this, see, it's interesting because when you look at it, people have this idea that things should be different. We should be concerned, right? We should be concerned. People should be different. The government should be different. Other countries should be different. My family should be different. I should be different, right? And look at how that works out. What all that does is produce suffering. So it's an interesting thing to consider. You know, when you start out to be a seeker, you start out as an ego. You start out as a personality. You can't start any other way. You know, that's the way you start. That's your conditioning. You start out as a conditioned human being that thinks they're a personality and thinks they're a body. And the only reason you're interested is because you think as a person that you could get something out of this, right? I mean, if you're honest about it, you think as a person, I don't want to just be a regular person, I want to be an enlightened person. I don't want to be miserable, I want to be happy all the time. I want to be blissful. I want to have clarity. I want to be a master. I want to be so effective and masterful that, you know, I want to be a guru. That's the ego. The ego is always thinking about becoming. It's always about, you know, this isn't it, so I'm going to try and find out what is it and get it somehow. If it's money, right, then I'm going to pursue it, right? If it's enlightenment, then I'm going to pursue it. How do I pursue it? I start reading spiritual books. I learn how to meditate. I get a guru. But the problem is, the interesting things, the cosmic joke is, the very barrier to experiencing what you actually are is the personality trying to become it. That's the very barrier. And yet you can't stop, you can't help yourself. You don't know how to do, you don't know how to do it any other way, but to try to do it. And so the process of being a spiritual seeker is to try to do it until it becomes, just like in that thing that I read, you know, before, to try to do it until it becomes so obvious that your efforting is causing more misery than you had before you started. And if you do give up at some point, it becomes possible to experience what has always been true, always been the case. But you can't fake it. You can't say you're giving up and not really give up. You have to absolutely give up. So what does the absolute giving up look like? Well, the absolute giving up might look like, because the signature of the personality is that it considers itself a doer, isn't it? It's the signature of the personality that it can do something. That's why when you attempt to become enlightened, you do something to become enlightened. It's the signature of the personality. And this is why so many people reject the idea that thy will be done, because it takes away their free will. It takes away the idea that they can do anything. And nobody wants to give that up. Nobody wants to experience what they consider to be helplessness. And yet that's the signature of the personality. So if you're really going to surrender so that you can experience what enlightenment is, you have to literally, actually, absolutely give up the idea that you can do anything. Now right away your mind's going to start to fight, right? Because you don't know how not to do something. You don't know how not to do things. And if you did give it up, absolutely, unequivocally give it up, right, then what you would be doing by doing that is accepting thy will be done, right? Because if it's not you, where's it coming from? See, what happens is what human beings do is they take what's happening and they tell a story about it, right? And of course, the story is a story in which you're in the right all the time in the story, right? See, that's the thing, you know, if it's true that everything is perfect the way it is, remember what I said, it's only an appearance and there's no death. So where's the sacrifice? And if it's true that the source is the real place that everything is coming from, you can relax. You can relax. You have nothing to say. And because there's nothing to care about, you can relax. You can experience peace, the path that's understanding, you see? Because you can't understand this kind of peace. It doesn't fit the way people think. It doesn't fit the stories people tell about it.
That's you recommend not watching the news.
No, you have to understand something. You have to understand something. If you watch the news, that's God's will. You see? If you don't watch the news, that's God's will. But you see, the mind can't give up the doership. The mind can't give up, well, you know, does he recommend you do this or should you do that? Is this the right thing? Is that the right thing? But still, you know, one of the other things that Ramesh talks about is there are different types of thinking, right? There's different types of thinking. You know, there's one type of thinking that is what he calls the working mind, which is the thinking that's related to just the obvious things that you do, right? That's like the working functional mind, right? And then there's the egoic mind, which is your comments about everything that you do. That's where the neurotic stuff is. That's where the craziness comes in, right?
That's where all the reactions are.
Yeah, of course. That's where the mind comes in and says no. Your mind comes in and says, no, this shouldn't be this way. They shouldn't do this way. They shouldn't think this way. They shouldn't talk this way. They shouldn't act this way. And then you impose all that on yourself too, right? So you walk around carrying this burden, right? All the time of what happened, what will happen, what is happening, why is it happening, who's it happening to? That's neuroticism. That's insanity. That's insanity. So, you know, the thing about it is if what he's pointing to is true, it's really pretty simple. Stop playing God. So the idea, see, this is again the egocentric way that human beings are. Right? The idea that this time is important, right? Your life is important, right? Human life has been coming and going for a long time. Right? The idea that this planet is important. We should save the planet, right? This planet's going to go. No matter what you do, it's going to go. The sun's going to burn out, right? But when you look at it from the idea, from the potential of the source, right? It'll just create another universe. Created this one, right? But you have to remember, you know, that if the source it's got infinite creative potential, this is nothing. This is nothing. This whole thing could end today and it'll just create another universe. That's what one of the things that Ramesh says is that's the idea as it's understood when you look at it this way. Is that, and when it manifests into form, it's the manifestation of energy. The unmanifest energy is potential energy. Even scientists agree that energy doesn't disappear, right? It just changes. That's consistent with this. You have potential energy and you have active energy, which is manifesting in form, right? And so they say the Big Bang, scientists say the Big Bang is when the energy, you know, took form, right? And the idea is as that energy continues to lessen over time, right? That at some point, the potential energy, it'll go back into the potential energy, and the potential energy will just create another universe, another reality. it's unrealistic to think about things like this. Why? So what's so unrealistic? What's so unrealistic about it? You know, what if the way to understand reality is to start with the idea that there's nothing hidden here? Start with the idea that what you see is actually what it is. Start from that. The reason that's a good idea is because you got a lot of evidence, right? You got plenty of evidence for the way it is. You have no evidence for what you think, right? So why not accept the idea that the way it is it? That's it. And just let go of your ideas about it and relax and enjoy the show. Because if it's an appearance, that's what it is. It's a show. See, if you go back to basics, it's like Ramesh said. If you go back to the basic concepts, right, your questions answer themselves.
That doesn't make it any clearer.
Well, it's only clear. See, it's only not clear because you're thinking there's something that you have to figure out. That there's something you have to understand that you don't understand.
Trying to be too analytical.
Yeah. But what if that's not true? What if there's nothing to understand?